Okay, cool. So you guys can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we went over embeddings. One thing I forgot to mention is one-hot encoding. So let's say you have a vocabulary with n words. Um, you can represent these words as a really long vector with n dimensions. And it's a sparse vector, so most of the entries are 0. All the entries in the vector are 0 except for a 1 indicating whether that column is associated with a particular word. So each column is associated with one of the words. So there's n words, there's n columns, and if the word is that category, so it is itself, then it's 1, but it's 0 for all the other words. So in this example, the word bisco has its representation. There's three representations, I guess. Okay, so that's now to a little quick review is there's latent variables and which are inferred from direct variables, um, well, observable variables, and we're using the bag of words technique, which represents a corpus of text, sometimes called a document, as a collection of words without caring about the order, basically. And for a topic model, we want to have several documents and sometimes called a corpus, and um, figure out the main topics of each document. So we looked at two techniques for this. Um, yeah, okay. Well, one example of topic modeling is to organize a library of digital books by topic without reading every single book, for example. So uh, it's kind of like clustering, except um, we're associating a word with each document, which is sort of like a vector. Um, yeah, associating it with each word. So here you can see the end results. So the first document is partially about water and a state. Um, yeah, and so there's two algorithms to do this. Latent semantic analysis, which more or less just uses one-hot encoding and then does uh, dimensionality reduction. Um, and latent Dirichlet allocation, which uses a Bayesian approach. So it starts with an initial guess and then improves it based on a certain formula. Um, yeah, also there's cleaning. So we need to clean the text as well using lemmatization. Um, and which is to, so yeah, we want to count how many times each word appears in each corpus, and we want to also replace each word with a standard form. Um, and then we'll output how much each document is associated with each word. So normalization, one part of normalizing it is to remove stopper words and punctuation, and then do lemmatization, which is to find the stem. Um, yeah, so you can see here where you're a whopping 90. So in this sentence down at the bottom, we can see we removed the punctuation and replaced each word with its stem, except for floating. I guess floating should be replaced with float. So that must be a mistake. Um, anyway, so yeah, we have the Word document matrix, and I think I showed you this animation last time,
Mhm.
um, which uh, has to do with clustering. And yeah, latent semantic analysis, we're using singular value decomposition, and we're using cosine similarity. And we're assuming that words with similar meanings will appear in similar documents, and we're yeah. So higher in the end results, a higher number means that the word is more associated with the document. So 3 is more associated with percent and less associated with water and rain, for example, for document 3. Um, yeah, and there's the cosine similarity formula and the uh, decomposition formula, which is basically matrix factorization. Yeah, latent Dirichlet allocation, we're randomly assigning each word to a topic, and then and then we, based on the prediction, we can update the prediction, and we know which words are associated with each document, and so we can try to assign topics to documents. Yeah, we're gonna skip this one. And we looked at embeddings. There's also some ideas about how many, or some ways to try to figure out how many dimensions we need in our embeddings. But it can have to do with the complexity of the language and the semantics of how many different categories there are and how they relate to each other. For example, in this example, we can see that these 4 words are related to each other in different ways. So in the top picture, we can see that cat, kitten, and dog are all about animals, and houses is more of an object, so it's clustered further away. And we can define further based on the cosine similarity or the Euclidean distance. So I remember I did a demo last time in a notebook, and I was subtracting the vectors and then taking the sum. I realize now that that was not correct. It should have been the Euclidean distance, not just the sum of the differences. So I made a mistake there in that demo. But yeah, we need the Euclidean distance, which basically means subtracting the vectors and then squaring each difference and then summing it all up, and then taking the square root at the end, as you guys probably already know. And so we can see here, the word. In this case, we can encode different information about each word depending on how many embeddings are in the embedding space. So you might wonder how many ways there are to fit vectors in a n-dimensional space so that they're all orthogonal to each other. So in a one-dimensional space, there's only one vector that can be orthogonal to all the other vectors. But in 2 dimensions, how many vectors can you have in the vector space that they're all orthogonal to each other? Well, you can only have 2, really. So you can only really encode 2 different things. But the more dimensions you add, the more different characteristics you can encode. And it also increases more than linearly, assuming that these are not perfectly orthogonal. And 3 blue, 1 brown, and had a good talk about that. So anyway, yeah, we can see here there's information about age and gender encoded as different dimensions. And we can see the examples can get more extreme with more vectors and more words. And you can include royalty if you add another dimension, for example. And yeah, there's the demo. Now, how do we determine the embeddings? Well, we can use latent semantic analysis and use that kind of like as a embedding, which or latent Dirichlet allocation as well. But that's kind of crude. You can kind of treat the word associations as being an embedding. And basically all these will convert a one-hot encoding representation of a word to an embedding representation, which is so you convert the one-hot encoding, which is a sparse vector, to the embedding, which is a dense vector, which has more semantic information about the relations between words. And yeah, so there's all these embedding algorithms to generate the embedding. Of these, the most important and one of the first ones that was actually good is word to vec. That's probably the most important that's worth learning about. and it uses a shallow neural network with so a 2-layer neural network. So it has only one hidden layer. So it has an input, which is the one-hot encoding, and then a hidden layer, which is used to generate the embedding, and then an output, which is also a one-hot encoding as well. And then there's also GLOVE, or global vectors for word representation. There was a paper at Google several years ago, like I think 10 years ago, that would look at the co-occurrence of words in a corpus and generate a co-occurrence matrix, kind of like we saw before. So yeah, kind of like, well, it's kind of like this matrix, except that it's associating each word with every other word. So, for example, air might, all the documents that encode the word air might also encode the word environmental, for example. So instead of having words on one axis and documents on another axis, it would be words and words, looking at words that are in the same document. So anyway, so GLOVE uses the co-occurrence of words and basically does looks at predicting the embedding using a regression model, and yeah, it's sort of similar to latent Dirichlet allocation, but we're using a the regression model to do the prediction and dimensionality reduction. There's also embeddings from language model. I didn't actually look into LMO that much. And also there's BERT, which is a more recent one, bidirectional encoder representations from transformers. Okay, so first, in order to understand, well, if we wanted to understand BERT, we'd have to actually learn about transformers, first of all. So we'll go into that. First, we need to know about, before we understand transformers, we need to know or understand the more similar or more simple word-to-vec model. So instead of predicting the co-occurrence of all the words in a certain corpus or a certain document, I guess I'm going to use the words corpus and the words document, the word document as synonyms throughout this presentation. Instead of predicting the co-occurrence of all the words, we're predicting only the co-occurrence of words within a certain window. And the input is going to be a one-hot encoded vector representing a word, and the output is going to be a one-hot encoded vector representing a word. And we can, the hidden layer in the middle is going to be used to represent the embedding. So yeah, the size of the hidden layer is the size of the output embedding. So there's two ways of implementing the word-to-vec algorithm. So the continuous bag of words technique predicts the middle word based on the surrounding words. So you can see on the left, we're inputting the surrounding words. So let's say that we're predicting the word W of T, and where T indicates the position of a word in the sentence. We can input, if our window size is 2, as it is in this example, we can predict that, or we can input the 2 words before our particular missing word, or and 2 words after, and then try to figure out what the missing word is. And if the missing word is at the beginning of the sentence, then like we're predicting the first word in the sentence, then W of T minus 2 and W of T minus 1 will be empty. I assume zeros. And what's not really shown in this diagram is there's a perceptron, so one-dimensional neural net with several layers. that is represented by these blue arrows, or by the blue arrows on the left here. Now, the continuous skipgram model takes a word and then tries to predict the word 2 words before, and then the word 1 word before, and then the word 1 word after, and 2 words after. So let's just go to continuous bag of words, for example. So we can take the phrase "she is a blank dancer," and then we can try to figure out what the missing word is, and use that as kind of a as training data. So she, and then there's 2 gaps here, and then we predict the blank. So you can see here, she a is, and yeah, okay, well, actually, in this example, we're having a sliding a window size of 1 in this example. And we are predicting the word is based on she and a. So she blank a. And that's this first example, and then we can predict is, or we're trying to predict is, and then is blank great. We can predict the word a, and a blank dancer, we can predict the word great. Now, with skipgram, we do the opposite. So for window size of n, we want to predict the words n words before and n words after. So based on wide, we want to predict that the word before is the, and based on the word wide, we want to predict the word that the word after is road, and based on the word wide, we want to predict that the word 2 words after is shimmered. And this is for a window size of 2. With a window size of 3, then we get more words that we want to predict, so more training data, basically. So with the larger window size, you'll have more training data. So based on the word shimmer, we want to predict that the 3 words before are the, wide, and road, and the 3 words after are in the hot, in that example. So assuming the sentence or the document is the wide road shimmered in the hot sun. And so we have 1 input layer and then 1 hidden layer, which is the size of the output embedding, and then 2 n outputs, assuming that our window size is n. And we use these skipgrams as the training data for the neural net, which is just a 1-dimensional neural net. And so for both these, we can use the probability of predicting the context word in the objective function. First of all, are there any questions about the word-to-vec algorithm, or are there any questions generally about anything I said so far?
David, I'm just curious, when you were studying up on word-to-vec and these methods, did any of the works refer to anything just a few years earlier in the development of text messaging, such as SwiftKey?
SwiftKey. No, I didn't see that. What is SwiftKey?
SwiftKey, when Coursera first made their data science specialization, SwiftKey was the capstone project, and they were already developing the virtually instantaneous word prediction for text messaging.
Huh. Yeah, I haven't. Yeah, I'm not really too sure. There's a lot of other algorithms to basically predict the next word. It's a slightly different problem, of course, because that takes the entire sentence and then predicts the next word. Whereas with word2vec, what we're doing is predicting the middle word or predicting the words around the middle word. Mm-hmm. So whereas in the use case you showed, I might be texting the wide road, and then the prediction might be shimmered. So it's only predicting the rightmost word, or that hasn't been done yet, or predicting that the sentence ends, I guess. Yeah, I didn't see that. I'm sure it's probably using a more complicated algorithm, but maybe it's a variation on, maybe SwiftKey is a variation on one of these, or some similar ideas, I would assume. Yeah, are there any other questions or thoughts on anything?
Yeah, I have a question. Like for real world applications, the number of words in your context, is it like around in the tens or in the hundreds? Like I have no idea how like new algorithms set the end.
Oh, usually my understanding was from that they look at the corpus and then determine, basically try to predict every word in the corpus. Otherwise, there will be words that don't have an embedding. So for instance, if we look at the look at the example from previously, we can see that the number of words was like super high, like it was in the millions basically.
Okay.
Let's see here. I think it was. Yeah, I think I thought I printed it. Hmm. Yeah, about 3 million words or so. Yeah, so my understanding is that they just look at every word in the corpus and then use all of them, basically.
Okay, but sorry, but about the window. Sorry, it was more about the window.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're asking about the window size.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Um, uh, okay. The window size. Yeah, I'm not really sure how that is done. I'm sure it has to do with the amount of training data.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I'm not really sure. I do know that the larger you set the window size, um, the larger you set the window size,
Mm-hmm.
the more training data you'll have, right?
Okay.
Are you able to see my screen with the word Tevec with skip grammar slide?
Not right now.
Okay. Let me present this, I guess. Um, okay, so yeah, you guys can see my screen now, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, we can see that the larger we set the window size, the more training data we have.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there is some sort of heuristic for determining the window size, but um, in general, if you're not sure what a hyperparameter could be, you could just take a guess, and then if it's too large, if it runs too long, then you can half it, and then if it's not good enough, then you can double it, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't really know the answer to that question, unfortunately. Um,
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, David.
are there any questions? Any other questions? Yeah, I would just try something. If it takes too long to run, then half it, basically.
Okay.
Try some arbitrary window size. Um, yeah. So, yeah, no other questions? Okay. Yeah, you can start to see why we care about the embeddings rather than the one-hot encoding, because the one-hot encoding doesn't have much context and it's too large for a large uh, amount of words, a large vocabulary. Which is why this formula in Word2Vec is can be kind of hard to compute because um, we need to calculate the softmax function over all the words, so over the entire vocabulary. So if we use word2vec with skipgram, and we use this softmax function, then we would have to compute the denominator of this function, which will involve performing the softmax over all the vocabulary words in order, because we want to predict one particular word out of the entire vocabulary. And in order to do that, we need to determine the probability of each word being the output word. And we want to, in order to do that, we need to calculate the softmax function. I guess the denominator could probably just be calculated one time, because it shouldn't, yeah, I think it shouldn't change in each term. So yeah, we predict basically the main idea here, if you forget anything else, is that we predict the surrounding words, or in a sentence based on, or in the window, based on a particular word. Or we predict some of the words in the window based on other words in the window. So you can think of just this example. We have a word missing, and then we try to guess what it is, basically. That's the key idea here. Yeah, and then we also have a hidden layer that the weights of which are used as the encoding. So input one hot encoding and try to predict the one hot encoding of another word in that sentence. So yeah, okay. Chapter 11 now. There is one of the problems with this approach is we can use recurrent neural nets to predict the next word. So we may want to use this method to predict outside of a window, right? Because word2vec has this arbitrary window, like window size is 2 or window size is 3, and we're only predicting within that window. We may want to predict outside of the window, or we may want to predict in a more just predict the next word, for example. And we can use a recurrent neural network to take the entire sequence and predict the next item. So maybe the Swift algorithm might be using some sort of LSTM or recurrent neural network, maybe. But if we want to predict one in the middle, then it might be kind of difficult to do so without the context of whatever's after. So yeah, we have a variable length sequence, and we don't want to use one hot encoding. And I guess we're assuming that we already have the embedding. So in chapter 11, we're assuming that the embedding is already made. So the embedding algorithm is already made. We already have a embedding for every word in the dictionary, and it's like an actual good embedding. And we want to predict the next word, basically. So I am blank. So you can think of a word that goes in there. But this could be a name, like I am David, or it could be an adjective, like I am happy. But in some cases, you may want to predict based on the context after the word as well as before the word. So like I wouldn't say I am, if I was to predict only based on before the word, then someone could predict that in the second case, I am blank hungry. They might predict that the word is I am David hungry, or I am happy hungry, for example, which wouldn't make sense because they're only predicting based on the words before the missing word. and we may want to include context from before that particular word. So, because basically what I'm saying is that the additional words after and before can both provide information about what the missing word is. And so we can use a recurrent neural network in each direction. So like, for example, a forward LSTM and a backwards LSTM. And at each stage, we'll predict what the next word is. And then we'll incorporate both the forward prediction and the backwards prediction together. So you can think of this as reading the sentence forward and backward at the same time. So assuming the sentence is I am very hungry and I can eat half a pig, we can take an I and then predict am, and then we can take I am and then predict very, and then I am very and then predict hungry, etc. And we go forward. We can also read the sentence backwards and take in pig and then predict a, and then take in pig a and predict half, take in pig a half and predict eat. So we can have two separate recurrent neural networks. And then we can incorporate them together. Basically, we take in each word, and you see the arrow on top of the H. The H is the recurrent unit of the recurrent neural network. So like, for example, a cell in LSTM, an LSTM cell. The right leaning arrow is indicating that we're predicting forward, and then the left leaning arrow is indicating that we're predicting backwards. So let's focus on the forward one first. So we take in each word, and the embedding part isn't shown here, but we assume that we already have an embedding for each word, and we can this H unit here, it may actually be several LSTMs or several LSTM cells, because the embedding may have multiple elements in the vector. Like the embedding may have a length of 300, for example, so we may have like 300 LSTM cells, which isn't shown here. But are there any questions so far? Okay. So we can predict, what the next word is, and we can also predict what the previous word is, and we can take both those predictions and put them in an output, usually by concatenating the two predictions, or concatenating the two embeddings. So we can take the input and put it into the forward cell and the backward cell, and then concatenate both predictions. This has to be done sequentially, so it might be computationally more expensive. It can't be parallelized as easily. Okay, so now we get to the encoder-decoder architecture. So for translation, like let's say we want to translate between English and Spanish, sometimes the words in an English sentence may be, or the number of words in an English sentence may be different from the number of words in a Spanish sentence, for example. So the example in the StatQuest videos was vamos. So in Spanish, so let's say I'm saying we go somewhere. In English, we go is 2 words, but in Spanish, vamos is 1 word. So we want to have a prediction architecture which allows the input sequence and the output sequence to have a different length. Or also, let's say I want to say let's go. That's 2 words, and in Spanish, vámonos is 1 word. For some reason, in the StatQuest video, Josh Sturmer was saying that vamos is let's go, but it's actually vámonos, that's let's go. But anyway, So yeah, the key takeaway is that the input sequence and the output sequence can have different length, but the state, the state that we encode it to, the encoding, is a fixed sized vector. So like embedding for the entire sentence, basically. So we can take an entire sentence, and then in this arrow kind of hides the embedding layer, and we can take the embedding and put it into the encoder, or each word's embedding and put it into the encoder, get a vector representing the entire sentence and the meaning of the entire sentence, and then put it into the decoder, and then get an output embedding, and then use another embedding layer to convert it to a word. So yeah, it's suitable for sequence to sequence problems, not just translating, but also other things like in biology. You can translate like a sequence of proteins to DNA, for example, or something like that. You could think that of like a certain sequence of proteins created could be have something to do with parts of DNA, for example, or other things. Anything where there's a sequence, you're converting it to another sequence, or converting it to a fixed size. And yeah, now one of the problems though with this encoder decoder architecture is that it converts no matter how long the sequence is, right? It could be the input sequence could be one word, or it could be like 1,000 words. And when we encode it down to a fixed length vector, like of length 300, some of the context of how each word is used is lost. So we want to have a way to ensure that the context of each word in the input is also used in the output. Because right now, the way this architecture is each word is used, has one definition, right? So for example, the word fair could refer to like a carnival type event where there's different booths and you can walk around and people show some sort of presentation, or like a job fair. But it could also be used in terms of morality and like fairness, treating people the same and reciprocally. So those homonyms are used the same way. Homonym is a word that basically has two definitions, or it's kind of like thought of as two different words that are spelled the same way. But if we use our embedding algorithms on corpus using the word fair in two different ways, then those different ways will have the same embedding, right? So the word fair will, if half the use cases are used as the event of fair, and half the use cases are used as the adjective fair, like the test is fair, then that will kind of mess up the embedding, right? It might, the point in the embedding space may be halfway between those two definitions, where those two definitions should be. And so we want a way to deal with homonyms, but also we want a way to deal with the definition of a word in a particular context, right? Because one example is queen. So the word queen isn't just the feminine version of king, for example. There's also like a queen bee, or there's the band Queen, or there's a queen in chess, which is different from the king in chess. There's other definitions of the word king, and the word queen. Or similarly, prince could be the name prince, for example, or it could be the title prints. So we need to be able to have a system which incorporates the definition word based on a certain particular context in the sentence, not just a generic definition. And that's where attention comes in. So, yeah, we need to incorporate the definition in a particular context, not just the general definition. Now, we need to have a way of kind of paying special attention to certain parts of the sentence, certain context in the sentence, and less attention to other information in the sentence. And we can represent this importance using soft weights assigned to each word in the sentence, indicating the importance. And we can encode a certain fixed width context vector at each stage. So in a particular sentence, we can have a context. In our LSTM, we can output it. We can have a system that outputs a context vector for each word in the sentence. And the regular embedding weights and the regular, well, and the LSTM weights are predicted using backpropagation. The soft weights are predicted in a more complex way, but they're only in the forward pass and change with every step of the LSTM. And so in the encoder-decoder architecture, we're using a weighted sum of the input hidden states at each stage of the LSTM. And there's 3 vectors used to create the context vector. If you're familiar with databases or just like a dictionary in Python and some other languages, we can think of a key and a value and a query. And so for each stage, we can have a key and a value, and at the end, we can have a query. And in some of these neural network architectures, the attention layer is a separate layer, in addition to the regular perceptrons. And the context vectors can be kind of mixed together in a certain way in order to capture the semantic meaning in one particular context or another. Yeah. So that's that, and yeah, I think we already talked about this. Yeah, and so here we're not using attention. Yeah, okay, this slide is probably out of order, so I probably should have gone over this earlier. But in order to output a variable length sequence, we need to have 2 special tokens, an end of sentence token and a beginning of sentence token. I assume that one of these can be all zeros and one of these could be all ones or something like that, or some sort of special encoding for those tokens. Yeah, so we can predict they are watching end of sequence and then translate that to French. And then when we initialize, so when we terminate the sequence in the encoder, we can use end of sequence, and then when we initiate the sequence in the decoder, we can use beginning of sequence and predict the next word. Now, for inference, this makes a lot of sense. However, for training, usually when we train this sequence-to-sequence architecture, we want to have a way to ensure that the decoding, so the decode prediction, is correct, because otherwise, remember that each stage of the LSTM we're training this using backpropagation, right? So each stage of the LSTM has as its input the previous step in the from the previous decoder LSTM. So like this rightmost cell. Can you guys see that where my cursor is on the screen?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, okay. So we can see that this rightmost cell has as input the previous LSTM cell, and we want to ensure that if one of these earlier predictions is wrong, like let's say we input beginning of sentence and we get the wrong word in the decoder, that will be fed into the next LSTM cell, right? And then we're training the LSTM cell on the wrong word during training. So if the LSTM cell is messed up to begin with, then we'll train it on messed up input. And so there's another technique called teacher forcing for these sequence to sequence encoder decoder architectures, which is basically means taking the taking the correct translation. So we have a human create all the training data they are watching and the French translation, and we use the correct input as the correct output at the correct translation as the output to the next LSTM cell, even if the first prediction was incorrect. So even if this LSTM cell outputs garbage, we still use the correct translation in the next LSTM cell. So that's teacher forcing. It's kind of optional, but it speeds up the training like significantly, which is useful for sequential models. Yeah, so yeah, because we're training the LSTM on the previous output of the LSTM, so we want to use the correct output for teacher forcing. It's kind of like we're forcing it to train correctly, basically. And yeah, I'll update these slides after. These two chapters were pretty context dense, but they're very useful for understanding transformers. Now I should have put this in the attention section, but there's this very, very famous paper, I think from like 2018 or 2019, called Attention All You Need. Attention is all you need. So previously, before this paper, the translation models weren't very good. And there were a lot of types of recurrent neural nets and convolutional neural nets to make these translation models. It's said that the best. I don't think we've gone over convolutional neural nets yet, actually, but maybe we should. I think the genai manual focuses on natural language processing, and it's kind of ignoring image processing and computer vision. But yeah, we haven't gone over convolutional neural nets yet. I can explain that too, but it's not in the GenAI handbook. So yeah, maybe eventually though. Anyway, so yeah, the dominant sequence translation models are recurrent or convolutional encoder-decoder configurations. The best models connect the encoder and decoder through an intention mechanism. We propose a simple network architecture of the transformer. So just to let you know, the attention mechanism, it means that at each stage, we're outputting a context vector. So they will output a context vector representing the meaning of that word in a certain context, and R will have a context vector, etc. And so we're going to get a whole bunch of context vectors, and then when we decode, we're going to take in these context vectors in order to output words in the translation. And the way we use the context vectors from the encoder and use them in the decoder may involve mixing them together in order to capture the semantics. And that context and using the context of each word, not just the general definition of the word, but the definition of the word in the context and how it's used in the context, is called attention.
Being mindful of time, we should probably start to wrap up here. David, did you have any more thoughts that you want to conclude?
Yeah. So basically, transformers use an attention mechanism to connect to the encoder and decoder, and that's pretty much like basically most of what I had. Are there any questions so far?
So the context vector, you have one context vector per word. Is that
Yeah, most of these implementations, that is correct, yeah.
okay? Okay.
And then it's calculated using these three vectors in the attention is all you need paper. But the concept of attention more generally is just determining the relative importance and the semantic meaning of each item in the context. So yeah, it involves the dot product of several vectors. This is a dot product notation here. Yeah, but we can cover that next time, I guess. Are there any other questions?
Okay, thank you, David, for putting this together and putting in the work for this section.
Sure, yeah. Okay.